Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso and this will be our weekly monk chat session, your opportunity to ask questions about Buddhism, and I'll do my best to respond. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the questions, and feel free to type in additional questions at any time, and once I've gone through all the questions, then we'll conclude the session, so feel free to keep adding further questions if you wish. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Okay, and hello to the people who have checked in already. Hello to Evgeny, Ryan, Joseph, Lydia, Mary, Maria, Gregory, Mike, Jeffrey, and anyone else who is watching. And I see there's a few questions here already. That's wonderful. First one here is from Evgeny, who says, is it common for monastics to achieve knowledge of their past births, or is this reserved for arhats? Well, the answer is neither. It is not particularly common for monastics to achieve knowledge of their past births, but that is also not reserved only for arhats. So the ability to cultivate recollection of past lives is something which is a power of mind, a mental power, which is not even unique to Buddhism. It's something which is found in many different spiritual systems which are currently existing. It's very common in Hinduism for advanced practitioners to remember some past lives, for example, and it's also found in a number of other spiritual systems, ways of training the mind to recover past life memories. So it's not something that's unique to Buddhism. It does usually depend upon, again, either very specific training methods for developing that particular ability, or it depends upon extremely strong samadhi, so very advanced meditation practice. So for these reasons, it's not particularly common. Another reason why it's not that common is because it isn't really necessary to develop the recollection of past lives in order to progress towards awakening. So the important skills to develop in making progress towards awakening are things like contentment, equanimity, mindfulness, serenity, renunciation. These are things which progress the mind towards awakening. A bit more advanced is things like the recognition of impermanence, that all things are fundamentally unstable, ephemeral, and empty. Again, this is something that's necessary to make progress towards awakening, but which doesn't lead towards recollection of past lives. And ultimately, what actually triggers full awakening is the recognition that nothing whatsoever is me or mine. And again, that cultivation of mind doesn't necessarily have anything to do with remembering past lives. So for this reason, it's actually not particularly common for Buddhist monks to recollect past lives. First of all, because the recollection of past lives is a relatively advanced ability that requires a lot of specific training. And second, because cultivating that ability is not necessary in order to progress on the path towards awakening. So it does sometimes happen kind of as a side effect of Buddhist practice. So as one is cultivating the path towards awakening, sometimes people will start spontaneously remembering past lives. That does sometimes happen. Again, though, it's not particularly common. but it does sometimes happen. And Ryan has a question here which appears to be referencing a talk Ayyā Sobhana gave recently, so I'm not qualified to address things that Ayyā Sobhana said, so I'm afraid I can't respond to that, Ryan. Okay, and Joseph says, in the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha describes actions as kusala anavajja vinyupasatta hitaya sukhaya sangvatanti. Can you explain what it means to live in a way that is mentally healthy, morally blameless, and conducive with pleasant results in daily practice? Yeah, so looking at these words, so again, the Buddha says that we should act in ways which are kusala. So kusala means wholesome or skillful, healthy in the sense of morally healthy. And anavajja means blameless. So things which are not subject to criticism. And again, this is in the sense of something which is morally blameless, something which is not, there's no moral fault to be found in it. Which means, in Buddhist terms, that means it doesn't cause harm to anyone, either ourselves or others. Vinyupasatta means praised by the wise. So when doing any action, we should consider, if wise people knew what I was doing, would they praise it or would they criticize it? And so we always want to act in such a way that if wise people knew what we were doing, they would be like, oh, good for you, well done. Such that we would be praised for our actions, if wise people knew. And hitaya sukhaya sangvatati means these are things which lead to benefit and happiness. And so, of course, the Buddha says that whenever we do acts of good karma, then that leads to benefit and happiness for a long time, extending far into the future. And of course, the ultimate benefit and happiness is cultivating the mind of equanimity, the mind of renunciation, the mind of relinquishment. It's cultivating the attitude of non-attachment. It's letting go of fixations on self-identity, on me and mine. Ultimately, that's what leads to true benefit and happiness. And so we do these practices in every day. So by practicing kindness, practicing patience, practicing tolerance, practicing equanimity, practicing non-reactivity, we're cultivating these wholesome mind states in this way all the time. And again, cultivating the constant recognition of the impermanent and impersonal nature of all phenomena. Following the precepts, practicing meditation, studying the suttas, these are all things that cultivate these qualities. Ryan says, could you kindly explain how you overcame drinking? Well, I mean, personally, for me, it just came about naturally as I took on the practice of Buddhist meditation, took on the study of the Buddhist teachings, and I started practicing with more and more dedication and sincerity, then I just naturally started losing interest in intoxicants. I do remember points where I just said, okay, I'm going to stop. And I decided to stop. But I was already at that point, over the course of practicing for a couple of years or so, I had already been gradually reducing use of intoxicants just because I wasn't particularly interested. And also as I got more into Buddhist practice, I came to increasingly appreciate the value of a clear mind. I came to increasingly appreciate how delightful it is to have a sharp, clear, alert, unmuddied mind. And so naturally I lost interest in intoxicants because they produce the opposite. They produce a mind which is blurry, which is unstable, which is unreliable, a mind which is difficult to restrain, difficult to control, a mind which is confused. So these were all things which I didn't want. I didn't want to have a mind which was more blurry and confused than it already was. I wanted to have a mind which was more sharp and clear and aware, a mind which was more stable. So just naturally, just through practicing Buddhism for a period of time, I already gradually was just dropping away in interest in intoxication. And so then finally, when I did come to a point of deciding that no, I actually am going to just stop using intoxicants altogether, it wasn't a big shift for me because my mind was already naturally going in that direction. So it wasn't a major choice. It was just something that seemed completely in line with what I was doing already. Okay, and Joseph says, how should the heart be? One, stilled, santape tabang, settled, sannisade tabang, unified, ekodika tabang, and immersed in samadhi, samadha tabang. Sit still, don't do anything, and don't deliberately think anything, but stay awake and pay attention. It's really as simple as that. Like, people think samadhi is complicated. Samadhi is the simplest thing in the world. Samadhi just means do nothing and stay awake. That's it. All you have to do is do nothing without falling asleep. That's it. And the mind will naturally enter samadhi. Samadhi is non-effort. It is literally zero effort. You just don't do anything. And the mind will naturally start settling down, coming to stillness, stabilizing, unifying, collecting together into samadhi. It will just happen by itself. As long as you don't let the mind drift into dullness, as long as you make sure the mind is still sharp and clear and alert while not doing anything, then the mind will naturally enter samadhi by itself. So samadhi, again, is not complicated at all. It's only difficult because we're so addicted to either useless activity or addicted to dullness and blurriness. If we weren't so addicted to those harmful things, then samadhi would be extremely easy. It's actually directly related to the question about overcoming drinking. It's actually the same. As one cultivates alertness, as one cultivates self-restraint, as one cultivates mental clarity, then you start to value those things above all else. You start to prize those above all else. So you start to see the blurry haziness of the dull mind the same way you view the blurry haziness of drunkenness. And similarly, you see the agitated restlessness of constantly thinking about random things. You see that as the same as the confused state of mind, the confused mania that also can happen during intoxication. So you just lose interest in those intoxicated states of mind. And as you lose interest in them, then the mind naturally starts settling into that still alertness, that peaceful alertness, which we call samadhi. Caveat, that takes as long as it takes. It can take many years. So patience, patience, patience. Patience and contentment. Because those are two things you can do right now. One of the great secrets to Buddhism, it's actually surprising how often this gets missed. You can be happy right now with one single practice, and that's the practice of contentment. Be content with things as they are right now. Like you're sitting there, you're trying to meditate, and you're like, my samadhi is not good enough. Well, be content with that. Be content with not having good samadhi. It's like, okay, it is how it is. Today, my mind is agitated. Okay, I can be content with that. No problem. I'll just sit here, be content with this restless mind, and patiently wait for the bell. Okay, well, we're practicing contentment and patience. And the interesting thing is, then you start to experience happiness, a relaxed joyfulness, even while your mind is still agitated, and even while your samadhi is still terrible. It's very interesting. And this creates the conditions for samadhi to happen more easily in the future. Or similarly, you're sitting there and you're like, oh, my mind is so dull and foggy and blurry, I can't focus. I can't concentrate. What's going on? Well, okay. Can I be content with this? Can I be content with a dull and blurry mind? Yeah, no problem. So I'll just be patient with it, knowing that this too is something which is the effect that has a cause. And if I just wait patiently, then eventually the cause wears out and the effect goes away. So it's one of the miraculous things about patience. If you just wait long enough, then whatever is currently going on will change. So right now the mind is dull and blurry. Okay, patiently wait for a while and it'll change. Again, it might take a couple years, but don't worry. Patience, like I said, patience. And contentment, be content with the way things currently are. And then you'll realize you're already fine. Maybe you don't yet have the best samadhi, but that's okay. And that attitude of being okay with it is actually what leads to you having better samadhi. Okay, Joseph says, would you please comment on this quote on mindfulness by John Kabat-Zinn? I assume you mean John Kabat-Zinn. It's always dangerous to ask me to comment on other people's quotes, especially if you specifically name them. In this case, you're also quoting somebody who is, in fact, known to be a secular mindfulness teacher. And so this also is dangerous territory because... But okay, let's see. What did John Kabat-Zinn say? So, quote here says, when we speak of mindfulness, it is important to keep in mind that we equally mean heartfulness. In fact, in Asian languages, the word for mind and the word for heart are usually the same. Yeah, so? Joseph says, so if you're not hearing or feeling the word heartfulness when you encounter or use the word mindfulness, you are in all likelihood missing its essence. No. So sati doesn't mean mindfulness and it doesn't mean heartfulness. Sati means paying attention. Sati means awareness. It means attentiveness. Let's just delete the word mindfulness from our vocabulary altogether. It's lost all of its meaning these days anyway. Sati, what is sati? So sati, actually interestingly enough, it comes from the root the root sara, which means to remember, which is interesting. We don't want to take that too literally, because if we translate sati as memory, then we'll really miss the point. But what sati does mean is it means remembering to pay attention to what's currently going on. Remembering to be aware of the present moment. So sati is paying attention to what's going on right now. So if we want to avoid the word mindfulness, then we might translate sati as attentiveness. That might be a little bit better. Because you say heartfulness, well, heartfulness just doesn't mean anything to me. If anything, when I hear heartfulness, I think more of something like metta. I think of kindness and compassion, attitudes of benevolence. That's what I think of when I hear the word heartfulness. Mindfulness I only really know as a Buddhist technical term that means sati. I never encountered the word mindfulness before getting into Buddhism. I rarely encountered the adjective mindful. Like, be mindful of the time, which means like, don't be late, pay attention to what time it is. Actually, pay attention, there we go. What do we mean when we say be mindful of the time? We mean pay attention. So that's actually what sati means. It means attentiveness. It means paying attention. Rather than, it's the opposite of spacing out or drifting off. So heartfulness, again, I just wouldn't use the word heartfulness, but if I did, I would be using it to talk about Brahmaviharas, to talk about metta, karuna, mudita. I wouldn't be using it to talk about sati. So, yeah, I just don't agree with heartfulness. I think that's pretty bad. Okay, Eric says, I'm working to understand that the observer is the observed. That doesn't sound like a Buddhist quote to me. Eric says, can you tell me how you came to understand this concept? Is there more than one path in understanding this concept? Well, it just doesn't sound like a Buddhist concept, so I don't have any comments about it at all. Um, yeah, in Buddhism we would say there is no observer. There is observing, but there is no observer. That's actually a Buddhist statement. Kumu says, in the suttas, why is there an order of the knowledges where past lives of the meditator followed by chutukpada, lives of others? That's recollection of the death and rebirth of others, to be specific. And then the third asavakaya, elimination of all asavas. So this is something which is found in a few places where the Buddha talks about somebody attaining full enlightenment, and it mentions, yes, having this sequence of 3 knowledges arise. So this was the Buddha himself, for example. When the Buddha attained full awakening, he first had the recollection of his own past lives. Then he had the recognition of karma and rebirth, recognizing that karma and rebirth was a universal principle that applied to everyone. So this is important because it was recognizing that his own memories of past lives, of death and rebirth, was not unique to him, but rather he was just observing a universal natural principle which applied equally to everyone. So it's a clear understanding of how karma and rebirth operated. And then the Buddha clearly saw what are the defilements of heart, the defilements which cause greed, hatred, and delusion, and which therefore obstruct us from awakening. He clearly saw that, and he clearly saw how to eliminate those defilements. So of these 3, the only one which is actually necessary for full enlightenment is the third one, knowledge of how to eliminate one's defilements. That's the only thing that's necessary for awakening. So elsewhere in the suttas, it actually directly states that not all arhants have the recollection of past lives. Because again, that's not actually a necessary skill to develop in order to attain awakening. So in the case of the Buddha, it was relevant because it was part of him developing a thorough understanding of karma and rebirth so that he could attain awakening on his own. But for other arhants who were just following the Buddha's instructions, it doesn't seem to be necessary. Again, though, it does often seem to happen as a side effect of advanced Buddhist practice and as a side effect of awakening, but it doesn't seem to be a necessary prerequisite for everyone. And Wise Man says, in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, how does one honor a loved one who has recently passed? Well, there's many different traditions and practices in different Buddhist countries and in different places. But one very standard thing is to do acts of generosity and dedicate the merit to the deceased loved one. That's the most common way. And I think that's the most important way. Again, there's many other traditional practices which are done, some of which are quite good, some of which are kind of okay, and some of which are basically meaningless. But the one which is pretty universal, and also I think is the most in line with the Dhamma, is this practice of doing good deeds and dedicating it to the deceased loved ones. Gregory says, many people leading happy lives when learning about rebirth think that it is a good thing since they imagine future lives will also be happy. How should they understand the danger in birth? By paying attention to the misery of the world. There's no shortage of misery in this world. And recognizing that you might be reborn in those conditions. There's a lovely sutta where the Buddha says, whenever you see somebody in any state of joy or fortune, then you can imagine, you can recognize, at some point, I have had exactly the same experience in samsara. At some point in this countless string of lives, I had exactly that same pleasure and fortune and success and happiness as that person. And the Buddha also says, whenever you see a person in misery, in misfortune, in distress, in disaster, you can recognize in this long course of life after life, at some point I have had exactly that same disaster, that exact same misfortune. So yeah, just look at how much misery and misfortune and disaster there is in the world these days. Look at all the people whose life has been completely destroyed by wars that had nothing to do with them. Like you wake up one day and there's airplanes bombing your town, and you're just like, what the heck is going on? Your home is destroyed, half your family's killed, you might be seriously injured, you're starving, now you're a refugee. You try to go to another country and they tell you they don't like refugees and they kick you out. And now what? Like you're starving, sick, penniless, no family, no friends, no country, crippled maybe. This is happening all over the world. So again, somebody thinks, oh, life is great. I'm having a great life. I'm going to have a great life next time too. Maybe. It's a bit of a coin toss. About half of samsara is pretty nice and the other half is pretty awful. And you don't know which side you're going to wind up on next life. So that's one thing that I might point out, is recognizing that, yeah, there are some really nice, pleasant corners of samsara, and there's also some really awful, painful sides. And you can never be quite sure where you're going to wind up in your next life. And Joe says, how should conditions be seen? Dattaba, comprehended, samasitaba, and discerned with insight, vipassitaba. They should be seen as anicca, dukkha, anatta. That's how. They should be seen as anicca, so impermanent, ephemeral, uncertain, unstable, unreliable. They should be seen as dukkha, unsatisfying, incapable of bringing happiness in themselves. And they should be seen as anatta, not me, not mine, not my true nature, not my true self. If you see all things in this way, then you will inevitably progress towards awakening. Ryan says, regarding samatha and vipassana, samatha, a type of meditation, aka tranquility meditation in which the jhanas are obtained by breath meditation, anapanasati only, or other means. No. First off, it's interesting to note that in the suttas, the Buddha normally uses the word samatha and vipassana to mean attributes of mind which we cultivate in our Buddhist practice. And in later usage, these words came to mean styles of meditation which cultivate those attributes. So it's a subtle distinction, but it is an interesting distinction. So in the suttas, we don't really find the concept of samatha meditation. Rather, we find the concept of samatha as a quality of mind which we cultivate through practicing meditation. So minor distinction. So jhanas can be obtained by, well, holding still and staying awake. That's it, basically. Again, people think jhanas are so complicated. They're really not. Hold still. Stay awake. That's it. The real reason why people don't obtain jhanas is usually because they live such messy, complicated, noisy, busy lives the rest of the time. And therefore, the mind never gets the chance to really fully settle down into stillness. So the average person spends maybe 30 minutes of their day meditating, and then 23 and a half hours cultivating agitation. Of course you're not getting jhana that way. It's just not going to happen. The average person, if they want any hope of getting jhana, realistically, you need to do at least a month-long retreat or more. if you want to get anywhere even remotely close. And even then, if you don't live a very quiet, peaceful, simple life outside of retreat, then you're still not likely to get jhana even during a 3-month-long retreat or more. It's not really about meditation method. It's more about creating the supportive conditions in your life so that the mind can become silent and still. Okay, Eric says, how did you come to know or understand no self, non-self? The main entry point is through the practice of anicca sanya, the recognition of impermanence. Because as you recognize that everything is impermanent, ephemeral, constantly changing, insubstantial, then eventually you start to realize that also whatever you identify as me and mine is also insubstantial, ephemeral, and therefore can't possibly be me or mine. That's one way which I find really useful. Another one is recognizing that what we call me or mine is just made up of natural components, which are constantly changing. So an example is earlier today, when we were eating lunch here at the monastery, I was actually contemplating the food as I was eating it. I was looking at, there was an open window so I could see outside the trees and grass and all that. And I was looking at the food in my hand, and I was thinking how this food came from that dirt outside. Like the dirt and plants outside became this food. And now this food, so this piece of nature, is being put inside this body, and the body will process it, and it will come out as dirt, which then will go back into the dirt and grow up as plants and then come back as food. So there's this cycle. It's just natural components moving around. So like once the food gets put inside this body, then I start calling it me. But once it comes out this body, I stop calling it me. And when it's dirt outside the window, I don't think that's me and that's mine. I just know that's part of nature. So there's this interesting cycle where we just have this like little lump of dirt that goes through this circle. And there's a brief period of time during that circle where we start misidentifying this lump of dirt as me. And that's the part from when it goes in your mouth and before it comes out the other end. So during this brief period of time, we call this bit of dirt me. The rest of the time we don't. And so this was the contemplation I was doing while I was eating. And again, I find this a very interesting way of practicing non-self. It's actually very visceral, practicing anatta sanya while eating, because it's something very tangible and real. It's right in front of you. Ryan says, likewise in the sutta where it states we obtain liberation by samatha vipassana combinations and or by meditation on the self. Can you explain how to meditate on the self, please? Ryan, I think you are overly paraphrasing that sutta, so I recommend you look at the sutta more closely. The Buddha never says to meditate on self. He does say to recognize that everything is non-self. That's a very important distinction. And the way he recommends to do that is actually very simple. He says everything whatsoever should be clearly seen as this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. That's the practice. Okay, and Itzel says, how do I not settle for the joy of thinking about doing something good? For example, telling myself or others that I'm going to start volunteering or doing community service, but never actually doing it. Well, start actually doing it. That would help. It's good to have the intention, but intention without action clearly isn't particularly genuine, is it? Genuine intention results in action. So it's like, oh, I'm thinking about donating to charity, but I'm not actually going to do it. Ha ha ha. Well, then that's not real intention, is it? So do something. Make it real. Jeffrey says, I don't think I have ever had a steady mind. That's possible, but actually if you start watching your mind, Watch your mind all day long and watch to see, does it ever become steady and still for even short periods of time? The truth is that pretty much everyone experiences brief moments of mental stillness. It's just normally we're not watching for it. So we don't even notice. So start watching for it. And every now and then you'll be like, oh, my mind was like still and quiet for about half a second just now. Wow, that was kind of nice. Huh, I want more of that. So start watching for it. And you might find that you actually do occasionally have a steady mind. Usually not for very long, unless you've been training yourself very well for a while. But every now and then you'll notice, it's like, oh, a little moment of steadiness, how nice. Okay, Gregory says, regarding your teaching this week, is it unfair that those born under dark conditions are more likely to make bad karma, while those who live in the light have more opportunity to practice virtue? First off, nothing in samsara is unfair. There is one thing you can say about samsara. It is completely, perfectly, 100% fair. And it also isn't true that people in dark conditions have less opportunity and people in light conditions have more opportunity. Actually, this is quite visible. You look around the world, look at all the ultra-wealthy people in the world. How many of them are using their wealth for the betterment of humanity, for the betterment of society, for alleviating poverty and distress? And how many are using it to buy useless fripperies and $20 million private jets and so on? Like, look at all the ultra-wealthy people in the world. How many of them are actually living a simple ascetic life while dedicating all of their millions and billions of dollars to the betterment of humanity? Some are close to 0%. So, do they have the opportunity to help a lot of people? Yeah. Are they? No. Predominantly no. Even the people who are regarded as great philanthropists, still that's usually only a tiny fraction of their actual wealth. Most of their wealth is just being used for self-indulgence. So this is actually the great drawback of having conditions of fortune, is that when one is immersed in fortune, then the tendency is to just devolve into self-indulgence, constant self-indulgence. And not even to think about the opportunities one has to do benefit for others. Or one does a little bit. It's kind of like, okay, fine, I'll donate 0.1% of my income to charity, and I'll just have to make do with the other $99 billion. I don't know how I'll survive with only $99 billion. It's like, well, you'll be fine, won't you? Because it's all about mindless self-indulgence. So this is the real danger of living in conditions of good fortune, is that it's very easy to slip into negligence and self-indulgence. Whereas those who are born in dark conditions, difficult conditions, yeah, they might not have as much excess to go around, but that actually means that then when they do decide to share what they have, when they do decide to go out of the way to do good deeds, then the karmic power is much more intense. So the potency of karma is not necessarily in raw numbers, but rather it's about what impact it actually has on you. So if somebody with $100 billion decides to donate $1 million to charity, that is meaningless, practically meaningless. It does carry meaning, but it's so insignificant. Whereas if somebody who's struggling to get by on $20 a week decides to donate $1 to charity, that is incredibly powerful good karma. Because that actually means something to them. It actually has power and potency in their mind. So that's actually a really big deal. So I actually wouldn't say that those who are living in fortunate conditions have more opportunity to practice virtue. I wouldn't say that. I would say everybody has the opportunity to practice virtue no matter what conditions they're in. Lydia says, is the happiness of jhana just the happiness and peace of being separated temporarily from the hindrances? Oh, I wouldn't say the word just. Because actually when the mind is free of desire and aversion, that is an incredibly blissful state. Even if it's temporary, it's incredibly blissful. The Buddha describes jhana as being one of the most pleasant experiences you can have as a human being. So this is not just kind of like, oh, I'm feeling kind of all right today. No, it's feeling absolutely, incredibly, amazingly good because the mind is actually pure for a period of time. Now, we don't understand how good it feels to have a pure mind until you do. And you don't realize that we're constantly walking around in this cesspool in our own mind. Like you're constantly swimming laps in a cesspool. And then one day you actually get to go for a swim in like a nice clean ocean. And it's like, wow, that's a difference. It's a really big difference. Okay, Alex says, in Itivuddhaka 53, the Buddha says, released is one who understands pleasure is suffering, pain is a dart, and neither unpleasant or unpleasant is impermanent. But isn't that release a pleasant Vedana? So understanding pleasure is suffering, that would be sukha is dukkha. So this means recognizing that all pleasant experiences are ultimately unsatisfying. So this is where the Buddha said, sabbe sankhara dukkha. So all sankharas are dukkha. Everything is dukkha. Everything is unsatisfying. So this doesn't mean that we pretend that pleasant things are painful, but rather it's that we recognize that pleasant things are unsatisfying, ultimately unsatisfying. And they're unsatisfying because they're temporary and unreliable. And saying pain is a dart. So again, it's recognizing that, oh, this is just part of life. Part of life is that every now and then we get stabbed by uncomfortable sensations. But we don't need to be disturbed by that. We just recognize that as an inevitable part of life. And neutral Vedana is temporary. So that means we can't rely on it. We can't rely on the peacefulness of neutral sensation because it doesn't last. The mind is sooner or later, usually sooner, assailed by pleasant and painful Vedana, which if we haven't trained the mind in equanimity, those will disturb it. So release here is talking about equanimity, because in equanimity, one is not swayed by either pleasure or pain. And interestingly enough, the Buddha said that equanimity itself is a refined form of pleasure. So one could classify that as a kind of pleasure, but it's a pleasure that arises from wisdom, rather than from having a nice cookie or something. Joseph says, why would you share there are 4 types of right mindfulness? Mindfulness of mind. I've been told that chitta can mean mind and heart. Would mindfulness of the heart be skillful? Okay. He explains in a bit more detail. He says, 4 kinds of right mindfulness, one being mindfulness of the mind, chittanupassana. I've heard that chitta can also mean heart as well as mind. Would it be skillful to understand and practice this as mindfulness of the heart? Well, it depends on what you mean by heart. So, chittanupassana, so observation of the chitta. Well, observation of the chitta includes both observation of mind states, mental attributes, mental qualities, and also things that we call emotions or emotional conditions. So usually this is why people like to say, oh, mind/heart, or mind also means heart, and so on. It's to emphasize that in Buddhism, when we say words like chitta, it includes emotions. So observation of emotional states is also an aspect of observing the mind. They're not something separate. We don't make a distinction between the mental processes and emotional processes. They're all just considered mental processes. And that looks like the last question. So if no other questions appear, then we'll go ahead and conclude the session at this time. So we'll wrap up here with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And for those who are in the area, maybe we'll see you for the weekend programs here at the monastery. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next live stream.